Welcome to another episode of the Spiritual Awakening Show. I'm your host, Brent Spirit. My guest today is Marie Grace B., one of the primary founders of an incredible organization known as Spiritual Emergence Anonymous. Welcome, Marie Grace. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here, Brent.
What part of the world are you joining us from today?
Well, I'm temporarily here in North Carolina with family, but I live and reside in the Bay Area in California,
Okay.
USA.
Love it. Okay. So, with Spiritual Emergence Anonymous, there's an element of anonymity. And so that's why I was curious about where you're from. It seems like you just share your first name, where you're from, and then about your spiritual emergence experiences. Many of our listeners are going through difficult spiritual emergence processes and are looking for some support. And of course, that's why I've got you on here to speak about your journey and about the organization and some of the offerings and how others can get involved and contribute, get some help, get some support as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'll read a bit of some blurbs from the Spiritual Emergence website, which is spiritualemergenceanonymous.org. Spiritual Emergence Anonymous are a grassroots worldwide 12-step program for spiritual emergence. In keeping with AA 12-step ethics, it is based upon donation, anonymity, and no promotion passed by word of mouth. The purpose is to support spiritual emergence in individuals whose spiritual transformation is so powerful that they desire assistance and support from a group in integrating their spiritual experience by seeking stability, clarity, and being of greater service in the world. Spiritual Emergence Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope to solve common challenges. The 12 steps and the 12 traditions of Spiritual Emergence Anonymous provide a safe environment to encourage authentic sharing and support among people who are integrating or have formerly integrated spiritual emergence and who are seeking increased stability and greater clarity in their lives. So for those who may be interested already, the links will be in the description. But such a fascinating concept, really fascinating. Marie Grace, talk to us a little bit about what brought you to this point where you began to, conceive of this idea of a 12-step program solely for spiritual emergence. What was your spiritual emergence or emergency like?
Well, my spiritual emergency, at least the first one, which was the primary one, happened when I was 25 years old. So that was 45 years ago. And it was before this was popular. In fact, it was hardly heard of. And that was very scary and very terrifying because I was really aware. Well, I'll start with how it happened. I had read a book about, I believe I probably picked up Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is my best guess, and read it and thought to myself, wow, this really resonates with me. I like this idea of being enlightened, but it says here in the books it could take lifetimes. I better start now. So I started right then, didn't know anybody else doing this kind of thing, and meditated quite, according to the book, quite devotedly every single morning for about 6 months. And then the expansion just started. And at first I was like, wow, this is really cool. This really works. And it just encouraged me to keep meditating regularly. But soon it started accelerating so quickly, I started getting concerned. I was actually out of the country working, and it got to a point where I wanted to get back to the United States because I could tell that that the symptoms I was having would be interpreted as psychotic. Definitely, hearing voices and seeing visions, but more things, synchronicities just happening so rapidly and accelerating so much that they just blurred into clairvoyance and telepathy. And things that I really was not acquainted with before that and was kind of searching to put names on. I couldn't put those names on them at the time. But all I knew is if I was going to end up in a mental institute, I did not want it to be in South America, which is where I was working. And so I quit my work and I came back to the US and initially kind of grounded. I visited, what I did, I think instinctively, is I visited relatives and my home, my parents' home, and and so I think I started to feel more familiar and I didn't feel like I was so out of control. I went back to school to continue school where I was actually in a pre-med program. But once I got settled, this was say a month later, a few weeks later, I just began to notice that the acceleration wasn't slowing down. Now, I think back and I think, why didn't I stop meditating so much? But it was really delicious. It was really delicious. The mind expansion was incredible and it was a wonderful feeling. It was revelatory. It opened me up to a lot that my basically scientific background, non-religious background had me completely unprepared for. And then I, of course, began to touch into literature that was New Age at the time and eventually actually spiritual, historical literature of mystics. And I was just hungry for it. But I probably just ate too much and got indigestion and quit school. I just couldn't even focus on the plane that everyone was focusing on, which is like learn the stuff, take the test, make the A, and then do that with all this minutia. And I was like, whoa, no, we're studying the human body. I mean, to me, every moment was a miracle of studying the human body. And no one could relate to that for sure. So I had a friend who said, hey, there's a Tai Chi intensive I'm thinking of taking. This was in Western Washington University up in Bellingham, Washington State. Said, I'm going to go for the summer and take this Tai Chi intensive. Would you like to go? And I noticed that it included Qigong. I mean, I'd never heard of any of this stuff. And it included Oriental medicine study. And it just seemed like it was so full of Asian things, the source of which I was suddenly very interested in. And I said, I think these people are going to be able to help me. So I couldn't really function at this point. I really couldn't even drive. And I put up we had a board back then. This was 1990. What was this? 1979. We had a board where you put up your name if you want to get a carpool with someone across the country, or if you want to offer something. And two guys signed up and I said, hey, I'm going to Boulder. They said, great. I said, okay, but you're going to drive. And I just laid in the back of my van over the days it took to get to Boulder and dropped them off and lived in my van in the mountains while I did this Tai Chi Qigong Oriental medicine course, intensive. And again, looking back, I go, whoa, that was like really not the smartest thing to do if you're trying to integrate back into society. And my faith that I put in these, they were really just young American men who had gone over and studied with Chinese masters and all these things. They had no idea what was going on with me, but they gave me the honor of saying, I think it's really great what you're going through, don't stop. So the acceleration just continued and it continued. I got so high and it was just amazing. I would drive and I would go through the traffic intersection and not know if the light had been red or not. And I'd find out on the other side if people honked at me. I never had an accident, but I knew I was dangerous. And so I said, I think what I need after I did this intensive, and I was not any better, if anything, I was worse. I said, I think I need just 12 months of quiet alone to read some spiritual literature and just integrate this. I knew I needed to integrate it. And I knew I needed to stay away from psychotherapists, no, from psychiatrists, that I could not let any doctor get near me because I wouldn't be able to keep my mouth shut and not tell them what I was going through. So just fell into my lap, this little cabin for $40 a month up in the Rockies, and it had no running water. It had a latrine, and I was really happy up there. I decided to spend 12 months, the beginning of September, 1 year to the beginning of September the next year. And after 12 months, which is when my funds, I didn't have any more savings, ran out, I was not ready to go back. You know, again, I really didn't know what I needed to integrate. I just knew I was hungry, and I knew it was good. And I knew that nobody I knew could relate to this. So it took me about 4 years before I felt like I was safe from being locked up in a mental institute. And I just kind of struggled through it. It was easy for me to get friends, and things just kind of fell into my lap, and I lived off very, very little money. I was very happy, except that I developed some chronic tension. I believe what it was is I was fluffing off so much that I got more in touch with my body than I could handle. So tension that is just normal to all of us that we just don't normally feel, I was feeling all the time. I had insomnia for 12 months. I couldn't sleep. And that obviously added a lot of tension to my nervous system. But I just got through it and managed to avoid psychiatry and my goal was to integrate enough into society that I could come back and be part of society. And I kind of managed to do that. There's a lot of drama in there along the way, like just a lot of drama. And over the years, I worked with a lot of spiritual teachers. Some of them were wonderful. You know, I can thank them for my life and my health now. Others were not so wonderful. You know, they hadn't processed themselves well, and they took advantage of me. So I got quite a smattering of both kinds of spiritual teachers and gurus and that kind of stuff. And I knew that I wanted to get married and have kids. So I did. It was like I bargained with God. And I said, look, God, I feel like I want to write what's going on. Well, I did write. I kept journals like crazy. But I got this message from God. He said, no, the world's not ready for that yet. And I was like, okay, I'll wait. And God said, think about it after you're 50. I was like, okay, well, that'll work out well because I want to get married and have a family. God's like, okay. And so that's what I did. So I kind of went incognito, which I could never do. I was still processing physically and emotionally and energy body wise every night for all those decades. And it felt, looking back, like it was just barely maintaining being a mother and a wife. And it involved a lot of critical times where I kind of had other spontaneous spiritual experiences that I couldn't contain. I think for a couple of decades, I lived an average of one place a year. It was very intense. Luckily, the divine is gracious. I have two wonderful grown boys and a young granddaughter now. Both boys are married, and they really don't know much about my life. I mean, they know enough to know that I'm doing some good work and do a lot of volunteer work and help people that need help, but they don't really ask a lot. It's probably embarrassing to have a mother who has, one, been through such rockiness as I have, and two, they can't understand what's going on, and it does border into what a lot of people consider mental illness. But I have to say, in the last 8 years, I have found a stability that has lasted. Usually my stability would last, I'd plateau, and then it usually shoot up, and then it'd dip, and then I'd go through another dark night of the soul, and I'd struggle. And I think that this 12-step program, which is what I experimented with a friend 8 years ago now, has really helped. And in a way, I was just fine keeping all this quiet. People were attracted to it. People came without any advertising. It's gone on regularly for 8 years, but I've been kind of glad, and nobody else in the organization seems too upset that it stayed small, because I thought the experiment needed more than the first year I did the 12 steps with one person. And then we decided to put it out there and find some other kind of responsible people who had integrated and were pretty mature that could be a backbone of the organization. Then all of us together did another year of study, both doing the 12 steps that we altered and studying the 12 traditions, which is a lot of why we were attracted to this format, because the 12 traditions set up a way that, by the way, oh, here we go. I haven't lost my clock. Okay. Set up a way to do an organization that would not cost people anything, that you could do for free, that would be based on donation, which was really important to me, because early on, I actually found, which was not easy to find, I did find Stan Grof's book on spiritual emergency, which had been recently published, and his wife, Christina, had gotten together an organization that was a directory of therapists that would like to work with people who were in spiritual emergency. I'll never forget going, oh, thank God, I read the book. I called up a therapist and they were like, oh, yes, I'd be delighted to see you, but it'll be $150 a session. And I was just like, well, that door just closed. So I was and as I went through the years and met a lot of other people who had various types of spiritual emergencies, I was kind of a magnet for it, in a very small way. I just saw that the people who were in the deepest throes of it usually did what I did, which is they didn't care about money. I was just so involved in my spiritual being and the beauty of giving to others and being generous and I would say being hypnotized by the beauty of the world, the natural world, and people's hearts, that I just didn't care about money. And so I gave away huge amounts of money. I have some crazy stories. I mean, not huge amounts. I didn't have that much, but for who I was giving inappropriate amounts of money away, giving my time away, and just being enthralled by the joy of generosity. Flip side, lying in bed, a lot of times just shaking and shaking, eventually having headaches, being in chronic kind of physical pain, and being so spacey that I couldn't function very well. So I never really have had a full-time job since then. I got up to 3/4 time. And then since then, my volunteer work has just kind of worked out that I have found myself in place. Actually, the entire time I have found myself taken care of miraculously. But what I want to say is, when we did the 12 steps, which, by the way, I had run into the 12 steps of AA maybe 20 years before, maybe 15 to 20 years before, when I had kids. I lived in a small town in Colorado, and I got this message, which I was accustomed to recognizing spiritual messages by then, because that's kind of what guides my life is divine guidance. And it was like, go do the 12 steps. And I was like, the 12 steps. Okay. I've heard of the 12 steps of AA. And I looked into it a little bit and found out that there was an organization called Al-Anon, which would be more appropriate for me because I'm not addicted to anything. And so I tried to get in there. And first they kept rejecting me, saying, no, you can't come in, not unless you're married to an alcoholic, or your parents an alcoholic, or your kids are alcoholic. But I kind of was like, well, God wants me to go, it'll open up. And sure enough, I think I talked to someone once and they said, if you have a difficult person in your family, you can just use them. So I had a difficult husband. I had a difficult son. It's like, that qualifies. So she said, just don't make a big deal about it. I'm like, fine. So I didn't. And I really enjoyed it. It was different. Mostly I had looked into Eastern religions. And I was not brought up Christian. So it was really quite intriguing. And I got a sponsor and I went through the whole process. And a year later, I felt God saying, okay, you need to be doing other things with your time. I'm like, fine. But over the years or decade or two, I remember often reflecting back. I did, by the way, get involved in Christianity too along the way, with a very powerful heart opening that led me straight into that. But as far as the steps, I always had this feeling that's like, of all the things I've done, even the churches, the 12 steps had a kind of a bare authenticity that seemed to cut to the core of what I was finding over decades of searching and suffering and exploring, that seemed to be maybe the core of what gets us in touch with our spirituality. So I had great respect for it, even though I didn't have any other brushes with it, until this happened where this friend and I decided to try them. And then a group of us tried them. And I'm like, I like this. Something is going on here. So one of the first things that we did as a group is we changed. We just knew that we needed to adapt it to people who were having spiritual emergency or emergence, not for addicts. So we did two things that were kind of key. The first thing we did is the 12 steps start with, I am an addict and I cannot manage my life, so I need to seek help. And it ends with, I have had a spiritual awakening and I want to pass what I've learned on to other people, serve other people. So what we did is we started with the spiritual awakening. I have had a spiritual awakening and I cannot manage my life, which felt totally accurate to us, made so much sense to us, because it's so hard when you have a spiritual awakening that is like bigger than your identity or your ego or your state of consciousness or your brain room can adapt to easily, that you have to go through this period where, and I think it's part of why you go through this somewhat of a psychosis, where you just have to let things expand and everything doesn't make sense for a while, and you're way more sensitive to other influences than this four-dimensional world. So it started with, what we decided is we would start with spiritual awakening, and then we would end after the 12 steps, after working them for a year. And this is after a year or two, it made sense to us to make this adaptation. End with spiritual transformation, which to us meant that we were manifesting our spiritual side gracefully in this world. Instead of this feeling we'd had of one foot in one world, which is what people call consensual reality, where everyone else is walking and working and doing things, and then another foot in a spiritual world where things are happening on other layers or other realms, however you want to think about that. And so you're walking around with a foot in each world, and it can be very disconcerting and throw you way off balance, to put it mildly. So we end with spiritual transformation, which is kind of manifesting being in this world and yet being able to manifest also embodying the spiritual side of ourselves, our energy field at peace and integrated. So that felt right. We continued and we started opening the doors by putting a website up, and people started coming. They just found us on the internet, basically. And then we formed a service board, mostly of the people who were a little more experienced, and some of us became sponsored, and we kept adapting the 12 steps. And then we did a year-long study to create a manual that's similar to what they do in AA, where you have these questions that make you, if you do step one, you have like a list of, first you have these paragraphs saying this is what you're being challenged with step one, and then here's some questions for you to apply it. So we did that for people who are going through spiritual emergence or emergency. And we began to look at the steps with a little more confidence as we were seeing that they were working. So the second step of AA is that I can't remember the exact words, even though I say them twice a week, but something to the effect of we reached out for help by looking to our higher self because what we wanted was sanity. We wanted sanity. And all of a sudden we were like, wait a minute, that does not fit here because we feel like we're sane. So we went, okay, that's good. So we said, what we're seeking is stability and clarity. So within this process of integration, all the bouncing around, all the trying on the different identities, all the like, how do we change our relationships with people so that they fit who we are? How do we change our jobs so that they fit who we are? Within all that, we're getting to a place where we're stable and that we're integrated. It all really reflects who we are now, in touch with our spirit and making that such an important part of our living life. And along with the stability, clarity, which is really valuable. Clarity is so valuable. And so it's wonderful. It is wonderful. And so that worked. Years into it, another big adjustment that we made is I remember I kind of didn't skip over it. I pretty quickly went through the part about who have you harmed, and this is the middle part of the 12 steps where you do 4 sections that are very powerful, but it's like, who have you harmed, and then asking for God to take away the shortcomings, asking for forgiveness, and then apologizing or something, maybe not quite in that order. But the point is clearing your slate inside in your heart. And everyone did that. It just wasn't a big deal. We started to notice. And as people came through, we were like, guilt isn't really the big deal here. It's this feeling of trying to have a foot in both worlds and how do I function? And it's more like embarrassment and fear that I'm going to get locked up, or people are going to look at me crazy, or I'm going to lose relationships. So what we did is we said, okay, that's probably because, as you come into spiritual emergence, your heart becomes softened and humility comes naturally, and you start to see your shortcomings. And if you're working with your sense of who God is, whatever that means to you, you have an avenue to find what you need to do to clear your conscience and how you need to treat people and how the appropriate way to deal with something that you've done wrong and you want forgiveness or you feel regret. So what we did is we shrank that section. It's the middle 4. And we could see how that's really important with addicts. They have to go through first clearing their mind, and then they realize all this stuff. Well, our form of clarity wasn't like looking at our history, like what did we do wrong when we were doing substance abuse? Ours was, how can we clear our mind when it's expanded now? And we have more on our plate to be conscious of, that kind of clarity. So then what we did is we shrank that, and it hasn't been too hard for people to do that authentically and honestly. And then we added a section on gratitude for all what people have done for us in our lives, because gratitude becomes such a natural result of spiritual emergence. And focusing on that gratitude helps us to stay in the plane that's growing into this new person we are. And along with the gratitude was the gratitude for the gifts that we are given, meaning our skills and our talents, and which goes into some of the confusion, which is, what am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to use my life? So that section has been also very valuable for people going through spiritual emergence, because integrating means that's who I was, this is who I'm becoming. I'm in the middle of this really uncomfortable transition, but who I'm becoming is like the keel. And if I know that I'm feeling called to this and it's who I really authentically am, then it gives us a keel. A lot of the first 3 and the last 3 we've left pretty much intact. They're pretty awesome. The first 3 is building that building that sense of communication with our divine guidance. And the last three are developing it. And then ending with how can we serve others. So I kind of jumped into a lot of SEA from my story. I could go back and tell all sorts of crazy stories about my life if you want to hear them. But since I'm here to talk about SEA, I hope I'm tying it in.
Oh, this is fantastic. It's fantastic. Yeah, it's just an incredible story. And I was taking a couple points that I think I'll ask you some questions on to share some more. But just really incredible, to have a structured way to work through spiritual emergence, a step-by-step process is what many people may actually be looking for, right? Because without that, it's very vague, it's very airy-fairy sort of thing. It's very hard to manage. Of course, there are some psychotherapists available that can work with you, but there's cost, and they're not very common as well. Um, so this is just such an incredible offering that you were inspired to put together for us in this community. So thank you. I'm curious about if you have any comments. I have a few points here, but I'm curious if you have any comments about the element of community in the meetings. There's
Yes.
something to be said about people coming together to normalize, to share, to support one another. How does that play out? What can you say about community?
Yes. I mean, I kind of ran into this step thing because it was part of the initiation of it, but really it's about the community because and I've been in some other groups. I've even started some groups along the way about, let's share our stories or get to have support each other. But one thing is it's ongoing. Right now we have 2 English meetings a week. I don't know if the Portuguese one is still going. It took a vacation during their vacation, and I don't know if they started up again. We actually had some people from Serbia and also from France who wanted to also make it available to people in their language. So people have taken our literature, translated it into their language, and then it's available on our website. But the point is it's ongoing. There is no pressure. And we hold to the beautiful structure that also has handed down to us through many years of experimenting with the 12-step groups. They didn't start like this. They found out through years and years like what didn't work. And that is it's confidential. Nothing goes beyond this meeting to anybody. We don't share our last names. And so we don't really know our identities. And we, in our case, very particularly, we don't share our professions. And the reason for this, that we stick very strongly to this, is that a lot of the people that show up either already are therapists or coaches or helpers of some kind, or they're on the road to become that. So it's very tempting to give advice. We do not give advice. We do not do crosstalk, meaning one person speaks at a time. Each person speaks from their own heart about their experience. And there's time in every meeting for everyone to speak. And the focus is on listening, on unjudgmental, careful, mindful, if possible, loving listening, because that is amazingly healing. Anyone who's in the support group knows that. So these structures work really well, and people come time after time and they know they can count on them. Now, when the meetings end, people can do whatever they want, but we still encourage people not to share last names and not to share professions and not to give advice. Now, some people come in saying, tell me about this, tell me about this. Of course, after the meeting, you can share what you want about what you've tried or what you've done. But the other nice thing about it, especially in this milieu, is that there's so much information and so many offerings out there of programs and people and gurus and teachers, that want your attention. They want you to follow them. They want you to try their program. It's so nice to be in a group that as long as you're just sticking to the 1 hour, you never hear about all that. It's out there for your availability, or you can hang out with someone that wants to talk about trying this and that and this and that, this diet and that guru and all this stuff. But for an hour, there's none of that. There's no pressure of like, I should be doing something beyond what I'm doing, because what we're doing when we're together is we are appreciating our experience. We are safe to become vulnerable. There is no one we're trying to impress. We are not going to sell. I mean, it's like a no. You do not sell yourself to anyone after the meeting's over. That's like, no, you don't use these meetings to sell your program or who you are. This is just a space for people to just be who they are. And that is really valuable, because that level of vulnerability allows healing, that safety. So we not only have community, but we have this space within that community where there's like this, I would call it a sacred space to be together in just the kind of way that we need. To just be ourselves. Because the other thing accentuated there is that, yes, there are a lot of answers out there, but really it's coming from inside. If we can learn and trust to follow our own inner divine guidance, that's what we want to do. That's what we're developing. And so this is a good way to just practice it and be there while others are practicing it and have a lot of empathy for them.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. I'm also, a theme that's coming up for me as you're sharing that is I can see it also helping to integrate any grandiose elements that may arise. I've certainly felt it where you have to sit and just not say anything. I've got the answer, I got this, I got that, you want to express, and you just have to sit quietly and allow those feelings to come up and not say anything. I can see that as being a theme as well. Do you have any comments on this idea of grandiosity that can emerge during spiritual emergence or emergency?
Yes, I remember it. I was called to save the world.
Mm-hmm.
And God just told me I couldn't do it till I was 50. But that what was it, 25 years in there kind of tempered it a little bit.
Mm.
I got a little humility in those 25 years, so that by the time I had God's permission to save the world, I was like, oh, well, it kind of doesn't look the same as when I first had this spiritual experience. So time heals all things. And I think it's a phase that we go through because it's so exciting. I remember one of the things that happened, for instance, when I was like really suddenly in touch with Christ, I felt like I was nailing my feet to the ground to not start going around and proselytizing. And I had the same feeling with the meditation of like, I just have to be quiet, because if people hear how I've got the answer and that there's a whole nother reality and that this reality is an illusion, they're going to put me in the loony bin. So it's like, I really wanted to share these amazing truths that were so powerful and so good. But yes, overenthusiasm will really be a bother to your neighbor.
Definitely, yeah. And I've been
And
there as well. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and dangerous, because of course, we get a lot of power in that rush of energy and that enthusiasm. So the other thing I remember thinking very clearly that first, I would say, year was, and people would ask me, they'd say, hey, I think you could teach us stuff. You should be a teacher, spiritual teacher. And I remember just going, holding my breath, like I didn't even know how to reply, because on one hand, I thought they were perfectly right. They'd recognize me. But when I kind of would talk to myself in my quiet time, I'd go, I don't think so. I think if I was enlightened, I wouldn't be in pain. I think if I was enlightened, I would be able to sleep when I wanted. And although everything else feels enlightened, those are kind of two really important things. And the other thing that happened over the next year or two is I began to realize how easy it was for me to misuse my power. I had I can't think of the word right now. I had that power, where I attracted people.
Charisma.
Yes, I had charisma. It was like just pouring out of me. And I thought, this is dangerous stuff. It's like, I'm not that clear about my sexuality, for example, or I could really misuse this and make a lot of money. And, I just, I had the right seasoning by keeping my mouth shut, because I was afraid of getting discovered by psychiatrists, to keep my mouth shut until I got past some of that charismatic intensity and past some of that grandiosity. But it's so understandable how people get into places of power, because the power is so great. And of course, the more people admire me, the more I was magnetic, the more magnetic I became. And, I could see that one happening. So I just thought, I really, really, really want to be humble as I can manage, until I'm clear enough that I know I won't mislead anybody. And that probably took until I was 50.
Hmm.
you know so
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
thank you.
so
Thank you for sharing about that so openly. Yeah. It's definitely a theme that arises for many. But it can be difficult to admit, right? It's difficult to admit these more shadow aspects of ourselves. Within the organization and the meetings, I'm not too familiar just generally with AA and how, there's some contemplating the mistakes you've made, the people you've hurt, going back, seeking forgiveness when it's appropriate. Is that an element here as well, where, because of people's spiritual emergence, they maybe, leave a relationship suddenly, or they mistreat people, and they kind of have to go and make peace with those experiences with the
mhm.
support of the steps?
Yes, yes, very much. And you know with with experiences of grandiosity, it's probably more obvious. But a lot of people, even just kind of ordinary people who don't quite get up to that level of being on a stage or having that, really exerting that much power, I often hear um, a lot of heartbreaking stories about cutting off relationships with people, especially family. And, kind of like when you really slow down and get quiet with that, there's this subtlety of thinking you're superior that is hurtful in a relationship. I mean, I'll be honest. I still invite my husband to tell me when I start getting into that teacher mode. He'll go,
Mm.
it's just not pleasant. And I'm like, I am so sorry. Basically, it's arrogant. He just says it
Yeah.
nicely. um, but it's hard not to do,
Hmm.
when you kind of like suddenly have this vision that's like 10 times wider and 6 times higher, and you just know better than all sorts of people than what they're doing, or you could save them all sorts of suffering. So, so I think that, yeah, I think that I was really fortunate. I didn't completely lose any of my relationships with my family, and I'm so grateful now. Mostly, I just had to stay away from them, but that was hurtful too. That was hurtful too. I just had to kind of keep a distance, and they didn't know what was going on with me. So I have been so grateful, and it's really happened since I started doing the 12 steps in the last 8 years. I have been like revisiting the family and just being like myself, just myself. And it's so nice, first of all, to be able to just be myself, which wasn't easy when I was struggling with that one foot in this world and one foot in that world. I still have all the spiritual experiences I want. I still have all the expansiveness I want, but I can also just be myself. So they've just kind of like gone, oh, it's there she is again, it's Marie. Like, that's funny. She was kind of off on this thing for like quite a while, I think, but she's just herself, and I like her, and she's wonderful, and she loves me just as much as she did back when we did stuff together. And that is tricky. And I think that these support groups really help, because one, they give people the support and community that they crave, instead of what happens is they're so disappointed in their family for not being able to give them support, or they're so disappointed in their friends for not being able to give them the support, but their friends cannot, and their family cannot. So when they have this wonderful support group where they can just be who they are, they can be vulnerable, they can even kind of admit stuff that's happening that's yucky, and they see other people going through similar struggles and they don't feel alone, then they can get kind of, it's a lot easier to kind of find a right proportion of how to relate to their family, and, you know, maybe encouragement of knowing that that will change. And, you know, there's just no need to create more suffering in the world, you know?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, at least what I've found is that we may want to relate with our family or friends on these topics, and we find that because they haven't had such a spiritual emergence or opening, judgment arises, and that judgment pushes them away, naturally so. But if we can find an outlet with people that we can talk to about these things, I found that it satisfies the urge to relay it, and we don't put that pressure on those who have no interest in it. Um, and that's what I found. And that's, I think, the benefit of community. It's like I can go and I can talk about all the far out stuff with these people, and then I can come back. And I love the word that you used earlier, and I use it myself. And you're actually the only other person I've heard use it, which is be incognito. Incognito. Um, yeah, you've had a major awakening. It's really profound, rare, brilliant, incredible. But here you are just being yourself, and other people recognize that version of yourself and can relate. There's an incredible example that you've shared here of integration and the way to integration. So thank you for sharing, for sharing. Um, I'm curious if you could share a couple ideas here about this topic of Kundalini. It seems like this is a major spiritual emergency that people go through, though not everybody. But some of the experiences you were describing, at least to me, screamed Kundalini. Has that been a common theme that arises in the groups?
Yes, it's common. Um, you know, also I think Kundalini is an interesting thing. I mean, I've studied a lot. And I find that in the group, there are people that come in and think they're having Kundalini awakenings. I'm not so sure they are. And then there are people who come in and they're having all these things happen. And I'm thinking, kind of looks like a Kundalini awakening to me, but they never mention it. And maybe they haven't run into it or for whatever reason. But the nice thing about the group is there's no pressure.
Mm.
If people want to call what they're going through a Kundalini awakening, it's still what they're going through. And if people want to go through it and never identify as a Kundalini awakening, does it really matter? You know, so the point is what we all have in common is we've had spiritual awakenings and spiritual openings that were too big for us to handle. And we all kind of are going the same direction, which is how to integrate it. And they also just seem to have a lot in common with people who have other spiritual awakenings that are not Kundalini. You know, although I won't say that because, you know, some people's view is that everything we're going through that's an awakening is Kundalini. So I'm not going to go there. I don't have to. I just know that it's about minimizing suffering. And if it helps people to identify it that way, great. And if it doesn't help, fine. And I don't think it's necessary. And sometimes it can lead people astray and take them in directions that is like extra stuff they didn't need to drag into their lives. So, you know, whatever, I trust that people all have their inner compass
Right.
regarding that word. Is that a good answer to your question?
Excellent. It's an excellent answer. And I think it aligns with my approach to the topic of Kundalini as well, because I get many people um, thinking they may be dealing with it or not sure and whatever it may be. And the way that I see it is it doesn't matter because the practices that I share, they're applicable for everybody. They're safe for everybody. Very gentle, easygoing practices, self-care, connecting with the higher power, doing the inner work, which is seemingly what's going on with the 12-step program as well. It applies across the board. So we can label it in any way, and that's fine. We can get into those conversations, but the work is the same. It's safe. It works, makes sense. Yeah. So that's nice to hear. Some other confirmation on about that in general. We've got a few more minutes here. I'm gonna ask you to open up a little bit about this powerful heart opening experience that you mentioned, which brought you in touch with Christ, was it, or was it with the church?
I would say it was with, yeah, the Christ in my heart, and then led me to the church because it was so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. What was that like? Was it a particular moment? Was there any practices that led up to it? Anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty dramatic. It was um I mean, it was probably the most like dramatic kind of intense thing of all my spiritual experiences as far as energy wise. Um uh I mean, I shouldn't say that. They were all so different. They were all so different.
Hmm.
This one was obviously heart chakra, but a very particular thing happened. And that was that I was actually at the time I had started a group. It was, I don't know, several decades ago, and I started a group of friends saying, I want to learn more about these psychic powers I'm thinking I'm having. And they're like, I do too. So we got a book about learning about your psychic powers, and we studied it. And we even got a lady from the Psychic Institute at Berkeley to kind of guide us a little bit. And so we do this. By then, we'd been doing it for maybe 7 years, and there were just a few core of us left that we really trusted each other. They were really, really lovely ladies. And at one point, I just came in and I was just in so much pain. And I said, will you just put your hands on me? They're like, sure, lie here in the middle and we'll light our candles and we'll put hands on you. And I now remember, I was not brought up Christian. And at this point, it was like Eastern religion or New Age. That was kind of where I was at. So, so they've all put their hands on me, and we were very quiet for a long time. And in the quietness, I went back to this kind of nightmarish post-traumatic memory I had from a past life. And it was really awful. It was like torture at the stake kind of thing, for being a witch. And it was graphic. It was horrible. I would feel it in my body. And I didn't been to therapists, but it would still keep revisiting me. And all of a sudden, I was back there again. I was like, oh no. And then I heard this voice very clearly say, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then I heard that voice, and immediately one of the people in the group said out loud, after everyone had been quiet for half an hour, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then pow, it was like a atom bomb in the middle of my heart that exploded, made everything else just like it's so far in the distance. And it was an atom bomb of love and light that was so beyond any of the spiritual experiences I'd had. It was inconceivable. And I was like, it was really great. And I was just lying there in it. And I could feel myself going, oh, this is so wonderful. This is really what's at the back of the whole cosmos. And kind of like almost like a nod, one of those telepathic, like, yeah, you got it, honey, or something nod. And I said, I have to tell everybody about this. It's so wonderful. Is this familiar? Like this could be all I want to do the rest of my life, is just to tell everybody about how marvelous this core of our cosmos is, that it's love and it's expansive and everything's okay. And then all of a sudden I thought, oh no, I'll get crucified if I do that. And then this voice very gently said, well, you don't have to worry about that, because look what's already happened. You just come back again anyway.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. And then I just bathed in it for a while till I came out of it. Maybe I had another half hour later. And then I asked the woman who had said that, I said, what happened that you said those words? Because everything else was silent. This was all going on internally. She says, I don't know. Just out of nowhere, all of a sudden, it's like my voice just opened up and I said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Oh, I left out a really important part. When I heard the words and when she said the words, I said, I've tried to forgive these guys for this torture that they inflicted on me. I can't do it. Can you help me? And that's when the POW happened.
Mm. Wow.
So I learned, so on the way home, I was driving. I'm like, I know where those words came from. I'm educated. I know that those were words that Jesus Christ said on the cross. And I'm going to look into this. And I did. I looked into it. And then, things unfolded. And now I am very happy about that
Wow.
experience and where it's led me.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. And it seems, I think you and I have something in common, which is generally speaking, we didn't get burned at the stake, at least in this lifetime, or end up in really intense traumatic treatment from doctors who didn't understand what we were going through. I had a few near misses, close calls with that sort of thing, but it seems like grace kind of uh, held me through some of those points. I guess what I'm trying to get at is not everybody is so lucky. Some people have experiences like what you just described, and it completely turns their life upside down. And they end up in a crisis, a spiritual emergency type experience, where, of course, then they can benefit from somewhere to talk about it in community and with a structured way to process those experiences because they are absolutely far out, really, really far out. So thank you for sharing that. Just really interesting. I had to ask about it. You piqued my interest when you mentioned the powerful heart opening. Brilliant, brilliant. So it's about time that we begin to wrap up here. So for those who are interested in dropping by a meeting, is there anything that you have to share? Of course, the links will be in the description. Any considerations, anything that they can do to prepare? What can they expect?
Just drop in. It's a standard reading. Anybody who's there can be the secretary, and all they do is read the structure. And we start with the standard prayer, the serenity prayer. You may know it. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And we end with that. And then each person, I think we read to the 12 steps, and then each person has a chance to share for 3 minutes. And then from there, we do different things in the group. Sometimes we read other literature. Sometimes one person tells a story. Sometimes we just switch around and people get to say more about what's going on with them. It's just very gentle. It's very respectful, very considerate. And it's a funny thing. I always feel better after a meeting. It's kind of one of those weird things where, like, sometimes I go, oh, I don't know if I want to go to a meeting. I'm tired or blah, blah, blah. And then always at the end, I'm like, well, I feel better.
Mm.
So I encourage anyone to try that. There'll be no pressure. Occasionally people come and they don't even want to be seen on video. So they have their whatever video blank thing up there. And we understand that at first because we're kind of inviting, through advertising that we're anonymous, we're inviting people that are cautious. And I don't know if there's anything else to say about it. It's an honor to be kind of part of this little movement that I think can hold a lot of people if more people need it.
Mm. Amazing. Yeah, it's an honor to have you here to talk about your journey and the organization. For those that are interested, spiritualemergenceanonymous.org. The links are in the description. You can check it out if you'd like a safe place to talk, to seek support, to know you're not alone, and of course, to integrate in a safe way. So Marie Grace, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing with us so openly. I'm sure you've got many more exciting stories to share, and maybe in the future we can talk some more. But for now, thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you for the work you're doing, Brent.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. To our audience, thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with us today. Until next time, much love. and peace.